Welcome, everybody. We'll start over. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The State of Native Housing, Programs, Policy, and Practices on Tribal Lands. We certainly had a busy summer, as I'm sure you have. Looking forward to our fall events. We're currently planning our annual Solutions for Affordable Housing convening at the National Press Club on December 6th. So look out for registration opening up soon. We would love to see you here. We also have online options for you to participate. Today's webinar is the fifth in a series sponsored by NeighborWorks America, and we are happy to have a group of experts on Native and tribal issues in housing, so we can learn more today about an issue that, frankly, I'd love to see NHC more engaged in, and I'm glad we're able to get off to a start here, albeit probably late. We know that we can't really achieve truly equitable housing in the United States unless we make it available to everyone, particularly those who were truly here first. Many tribal lands are in extremely impoverished and rural areas. That's not a mistake, as we all know from American history. They lack basic infrastructure like phone service and broadband connections and plumbing and sewer systems, which is frankly a tragedy of American history. We have a substantial opportunity as a result and an obligation to make strong, meaningful investment in these communities. Programs like the Indian Housing Block Grant, the Indian Community Development Block Grant Program, the Section 184 Indian Home Loan Guarantee Program, and parts of the Community Reinvestment Act can help bridge some of the funding barriers that Native communities face. These programs, although as we can imagine are not nearly enough, takes the work of experts like those that we're going to hear from today to efficiently administer these funds and build stronger communities in and around tribal lands. Our panelists will speak today about how they utilize available federal funding and other resources to help bolster housing and community development activities. They will offer a survey of practices and programs that are geared towards meeting the challenges within Native communities and offer strategies on how best to serve Native people. Our discussion today will be moderated by Mellor Wiley, NeighborWorks America's new Director of Native Strategy and Partnerships, and we'll be taking audience questions after the presentations. So please submit your questions for the panelists through the Q&A function. Now we'll get started, and I'd like to welcome Mel. Thank you for joining us and for doing this work.
Excuse me. Hi, my name is Mellor Willie. Let me allow myself to introduce myself in my native language. Mellor Willie Yanishya Tachini Nishle, Sanaha Betling Bashishtin, Ashi Edashiche, Kia Ana Edashinella, Sagahotzande Nasha. I'd like to also acknowledge that I live and work here in Washington, D.C., in the land of the what used to be the Anacostia and the Nokotchunk people, and who are now today also the tribal lands of the Pamunkey and Piscataway. This area is very significant to Native people because, as all Native people, we recognize the place where there is the joining of two great rivers, and as in this area of Washington, D.C., where there's the joining of the Anacostia and the two rivers that come together here, and where the Anacostia people reside. I'm grateful to be here to moderate this great panel of experts in Indian housing, and I'm very honored to be asked to moderate this panel today. If we can move on to the first slide, please. Thank you. Wanted to first start with giving some background of Indian housing. I can't do that without speaking about the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, which was passed in 1996. NAHASDA created the Indian Housing Block Grant Program, which is probably the single largest investment for Indian housing to tribes. NAHASDA came about because tribes were working with HUD programs, and the HUD programs weren't necessarily a good fit before NAHASDA. A lot of the tribes and the regulations were focused for urban housing authorities. And so tribes were not necessarily fitting into those different regulations. So tribes came together, and some of those folks, even Jackie Peta, who's a panelist on this panel, they came together and created a commission. And out of that commission, they determined that tribes needed to have more local control over their housing funding dollars that were received from HUD. And what the block grant program allows is for a tribe to create its own Indian housing plan, have that Indian housing plan presented to HUD, and then they execute the housing activities and services according to their own plan. It's really this essence of self-determination and self-governance, and actually allowing for local control based upon housing needs of each community. And I'll talk to a little bit more about that. And the reasons why this is important is also because there's such a huge diversity within Indian country. With all the 570 plus tribes across the United States, they all have different varied characteristics, different varied languages, and different geographies. And allowing them to put together their own Indian housing plan based on their housing needs in their community allowed for greater flexibility, and also allows for greater flexibility for leveraging the federal investment to Indian country. If you move on to the next slide. One thing that is a bit troublesome about the Indian Housing Block Grant is the funding levels. Since its inception in 1998, the funding has been flatlined at around $600 million. We noted that there's a special note in this graphic here. It kind of shows the level funding on the top, which is the nominal dollars that are there. But if you compare it to the initial investment that was made in 1998, you see that the buying power is decreasing every year as the congressional allocations are level. We noted in the special note there that in 2021, there's added $400 million in ARPA funding that was included into the Indian Housing Block Grant. But again, that only comes out to $450 million and $98. Also, the allocation is split between tribes. And so tribes receive a certain amount of allocation, and there's been some new federally recognized tribes that have come in to play since 1998. And also the service area population, which tribes have included in their service area, has grown. And so this allocation continues to be diminished by the tribes when they receive the funding. One thing that I noted and wanted to note that in 1997, the HUD Indian Housing Needs Study noted that one of the outcomes from flatline funding was that it decreased the development of new housing units because a lot of the older housing units were also needing maintenance and repair and rehab. And so they saw that when in 1997, I'm sorry, in 2017, they noted that tribes are increasingly using their monies for rehabilitation of their older housing units, while new housing developments were decreasing. One of the upsides to this, and as I was thinking about this, is that it creates more opportunity, though, for tribes to seek and leverage the IHBG funding. And tribes are learning how to do that and continue to move forward in using different products. The next slide, please. Again, the Housing Needs Assessment Study determined in 2017 that Indian country needs 333,000 new units to eliminate the overcrowding in the American Indian Alaska Native population in tribal areas, and another 35,000 new units to replace units that were severely and physically inadequate. The total need of 68,000 new units are needed in Indian country. This is a important number to put out there because I think it underscores the great housing need that exists in Indian country. But also tribes have been implementing their own needs assessments within their communities. And one thing that I noted in the slide that was previous slide is Washington State. There's been housing needs assessments that have been have been conducted there and finding some of their issues that exist. I'll also talk a little bit more about the issues that just within this last week, but doing case study on the Housing Assistance Fund and noting when tribes do start to initiate new funding streams that they find varied issues that exist that they never thought about before. The next slide, please. Again, there are 574 American Indian and Alaska Native tribes in the United States. This is a map from the US Census. And the green areas show the reservation lands. Not all tribes have reservations. I think there's about, wanted to note that there's over 325 American Indian reservations, and tribes, there's about 618 legal and statistical areas. The other thing is to mention is that Alaska, almost half of the federally recognized tribes are in the Alaska region. And we're glad to have Jackie on this panel because it's important to remember the varied issues in housing development within Alaska Native areas. The next slide, please. I can't overemphasize this enough that the tribes are diverse. And when working with tribes, you need to take into consideration that no two tribes are the same. We each all have different land areas. We have different governance systems, distinct cultures and languages. One thing to note is that while there are 618 legal and statistical areas identified by tribes as tribal areas, only 22% of American Indians and Alaska Natives live in those statistical areas. So this shows you that there's up to 70+% of American Indians live out of tribal areas. So we have a large population of urban Indian population that also needs to be provided housing services and programs. One thing that the Washington State study noted in its and looking at the issues that were being presented in Washington State, that the urban Indian organizations had varied issues that are different from the tribal housing programs and providing housing within tribal areas. Also important to note that 21% of American Indian Alaska Natives speak a language other than English, noting that they speak their own traditional language. The next slide, please. COVID, unfortunately, showed us some realities of what happens when you have underhoused communities. What did we learn? And this is a quote that's taken out of the testimony of Sharon Vogel. She's the executive director of the Cheyenne River Housing Authority. She gave testimony before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. And I thought this quote was important to know is that the pandemic has exposed significant gaps in our federal housing safety net. Housing inequities contributed to the spread of COVID-19 cases and deaths, and the lack of universal housing assistance placed tens of millions of renters at risk of losing their homes with them, and with them, the ability to keep themselves and their families safe. We can build back better by closing gaps in our safety net so that our tribal governments in our nation are better prepared for the next crisis. The issues of COVID really hit Indian country very real. Even in my community of Navajo, at one time we were the highest, had the highest levels of COVID exposure and deaths in the nation per capita, and really traumatically impacted a lot of tribal communities. I know that in my previous work, I worked with a board member of one of my clients, and they shared the story that most of the tribal elders within their community had passed away. And with the passing of those tribal elders, you lose a lot of that, that knowledge, that culture, and the language that is important to the community. And it's devastated the communities. And I think we really need to think about what's going to be the impact after COVID. We also have the large amount of federal investments that's come into Indian country, the CARES Act, the ARPA funding era and half. And with these fundings, tribes and especially tribal housing programs have had to kind of revamp and relook at how do they expend these dollars in a way that's impactful for their community. I'll give a couple of examples later on about the discussions that I've had with two housing authorities, Acoma Housing Authority and Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority, and their experiences with the half dollars. So it's really thinking about here in the state of Native housing is where do we go from here after the pandemic? The next slide. I wanted to outline some of the broad opportunities that I see in Native housing. You see with the IHBG program, the Indian Housing Block Grant, that there's opportunities to build partnerships for home ownership. And I think Tlingit-Haida Regional Housing Authority is working with a diverse group of partners to meet their housing needs. NeighborWorks had an opportunity to go visit Tlingit-Haida, and some of my colleagues and staff have just come away with just some great eye-opening experiences and seeing how a tribal housing program, when we think that they're limited to just Indian housing block grants, they're not. They can do unique partnerships, and I think Jackie will share that with you. The other thing is tribes are diverse, and there's opportunities to create partnerships with state, county, and local nonprofit partners to meet the housing need. One thing that we saw within the execution of the ERA dollars, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, is for the first time, some of these tribal communities really understood that there is a large homeless population. And often that homeless population is not on tribal land, it's in urban Indian areas. And so how can the tribal housing programs, the Native CDFIs and others partner with urban Indian organizations and service providers to address that, that population? It's definitely going to have to be done through partnerships. The other area that there's broad opportunity is strengthening our data, build outlets for collection of tribal data on homeownership, homelessness, and social services. And this is the great thing about having the Center for Indian Country Development, because it's meeting much of this need and providing data and research that can go back to inform tribes. I know when I served as the executive director of the National American Indian Housing Council, it was really difficult to provide data and research to tribal leaders so that they can be better informed on the strategies that they're implementing at the tribal level. And so it's good that the Center for Indian Country Development is focusing on educating tribal leaders with using hard data. Also, wanted to point out the proliferation of Native CDFIs is creating empowerment, and it works. The Center for Indian Country Development noted that just having a Native CDFI in a community actually increases credit scores. And it's a way in which those people who have never had an opportunity to have loans can actually get a start out loan and start building their credit. So the fact of just even having a Native CDFI in your tribal community is increasing the credit score, which moves on to mobilizing home buyers for home ownership. Also, there's also broad opportunities for the creation of coalitions. The environment is very fresh for people collaborating together. I know in my presentation later that the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition is doing this work, and there are other state coalitions like Montana and New Mexico that are building. And financial education. Financial education not only empowers tribal communities, but it empowers Native families. And we know that education does not leave us, and it's something that we can always carry on. And kudos out to Owista Corporation being the first Native organization to serve as a HUD counseling intermediary. And it took 50 years to do that, but they've come forward as a HUD counseling intermediary. Next slide, please. One thing that I wanted to know is some of the work that we're doing at NeighborWorks is impactful. I'm the director of Native Strategy at NeighborWorks America. It's the first time that they've had a person created this position. And we're executing a Native strategy within NeighborWorks that not only focuses on educating the great colleagues and people that I work with at NeighborWorks about how they can create partnerships with tribal communities, but also our vast networks. NeighborWorks has over 250 network organizations, and the work that they do on the ground can also be collaborations with tribal communities. But we also create national partnerships, and one of our partnerships is with the National American Indian Housing Council. We're funding them this year at $100,000 to create curriculum on low-income housing tax credit units and moving those into homeownership after year 15. One thing that we found out is that there's about 32,000 LIHTC units across Indian country, and they're at varied points in their 15-year regulations. And at some point they will move over. And we're looking at creating curriculum to help tribes move over to home ownership. We're offering first, we're collecting the data on all of those units. They're going to hold a in-person cohort in December of this year, bringing together those tribes that have LIHTC units, those tribes that may have already transitioned their LIHTC units, and getting the lessons learned and the best practices. And then we'll start to create the curriculum and also launch that curriculum in June of 2023. After that, it will be provided out to tribes. This is a great way to look at creating homeownership opportunities in tribal communities and also creating lasting curriculum that we can learn from. The next slide, please. NeighborWorks also provides grants to our local networks, our network providers. Two of our grants that are provided to the in the state of South Dakota is to Grow South Dakota and also Lakota funds. And that helps to fund the work that's happening with the Native Homeownership Coalition. One thing that I'd like to, reason why I kind of point this out is the coalition is really, in my years of working in housing and also in Indian country, they've been able to create some really open and trustful relationships for dialogue with federal partners, state partners, non-native and native housing organizations. They have some great strategies that are coming out of the work. They have the 502 relending pilot project that's been moving forward. They have a construction internship project that's been happening, and it's a broad scale in South Dakota. They're moving that construction internship project into North Dakota. And again, it's a great model for other states to follow in creating these coalitions. And you can just, when you walk into the environments and you sit down with discussions with them, you can see that they're really working together in a mutually beneficial way. The next slide, please. And I'd like to go ahead and turn the time over to Brittany and to Jackie. Jackie's going to be up next. Thanks.
Goodness, Chish Meller. Kus inyo katuasap suka adi ayahat kagwantan yari yeshitak. In my own language, I introduced myself. My English name is Jackie Paytas. My Tlingit name is Kus In. I'm from the Raven Sakai clan from the Raven House in Deshu, which is Haines, Alaska. And I too would like to follow Meller's footsteps and acknowledge that I live and work on Akwan, which is the Ak people's land here in Zante Kahina, Juneau, Alaska. Thank you so much for inviting me to present today. I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you right now. Sorry, good. Share screen. 1 second here. Got to press share screen first before I press the full screen. Okay. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about community development. And so in following Meller a little bit to just kind of re-emphasize some of the things that he touched on, which when you're working with tribes, respect for tribal sovereignty and self-determination is one of those core principles. Tribal sovereignty and whatever the partnership is just a fundamental principle of each tribe. And always to remember that each tribe is their own autonomous government. Their language, culture, and traditional practices are unique to each tribe, so don't assume that they're all the same. And it's really important, especially for entities who want to come in and research, to build trust before you research, and always tribes are always looking for local solutions. And that's important for me as a tribal citizen working in my own tribal communities, for me to remember all of these too. And I was looking at some information about those who had provided community development, and I really loved what the Humboldt State University said, especially in their goals. And it said, as defined by each American Indian community. Well, this is where I live in Southeast Alaska. And I am the Tribal Housing Authority, the tribally designated housing authority under NAHASDA for 12 separate autonomous tribal governments. I also provide other housing services to 3 other tribes in our region. And so as a community development organization, regional housing authority, I need to remember those principles of respecting each tribal government as their own tribes, even though we live and work within the same region. And I want to share with you a little bit about how we do that. First of all, when I'm talking about these local solutions, and touching base on what Meller said about things that have been really difficult for tribes, like loss of land and independence and loss of language by, policies that didn't necessarily keep tribal independence and sovereignty at the forefront. So right now, the tribes are very committed to things like restoring and buying back land, or negotiating with the feds and other state governments protocols on consultation and how do we engage, what does that representation look like? And many of the tribes actually compact federal programs. And of course, core to all of that is, as we're doing that, tribes are really working hard to restore their languages and to make sure that there's authentic cultural representation. So as I'm looking at that with the communities that I serve, it was really important for us to recognize each of those tribal governments as partners, but also recognize that there were things that the housing authority, as just a housing entity providing rental and home ownership opportunities, couldn't do just on their own. And so one of our core partners was, we created Hayakawa Financial Corporation, our CDFI. And it was one of the first CDFIs in the nation that was certified by Treasury. And it has really helped our housing authority to rethink how we do our business. So the housing authority, and I'll give you some examples about the housing authority, helps provide the construction, and the Hayakawa does a lot of the other lending and financial education kind of partnerships. But we have lots of other strategic partnerships in order to be able to meet the needs of all of our tribes. But how did we get there? How did we define what those really were? So in 2019, and thank goodness we did it right before COVID, because it really helped us with all the COVID money coming up. So what we did was, we met with each of our tribes individually, and we surveyed their tribal citizens individually, and we developed these strategic surveys and analysis for each community. And we have one that I demonstrate here is the consolidated version. But every tribe got one of these surveys and this analysis, which is their priorities. And then we came together and said, okay, how do we achieve the things that we want? Now, these were housing related, and some of them were not so housing related, because some of them are foundational to other community development activities as well as housing. So there were things that we hadn't explored before, like how do we provide education centers in our village, or how do we deal with violence against women, women's shelters, other kinds of things that the tribes were asking for in their priorities. So they put together their priorities, and then we put together these 10-year guiding principles and a decision-making matrix. One of the things that was so important to us is making sure, in order to have good relationships, just like you would with any other partner, is that we were communicating well with each other and we understood each other's expectations. And this is just an example of our priorities. It needed to be supported by our community needs survey. We needed to make sure that we were talking about leverage and return on investment and a shared regional priority, and how were we going to deal with project readiness. And some of those were things that the tribes weren't really thinking about when they were making decisions, and sometimes the decisions of passion of what the needed to be. And it allowed us then to rethink home ownership, because ultimately we wanted more houses, and there hadn't been any new houses built in our communities in 20 years. And so we decided that we didn't want the boom and bust anymore. We didn't want to hire a large local lower 48 contractor to come up and build, 10, 20 homes in our village and then to leave. We wanted to create a sustainable operation that allowed to build our own local crews, that we could build our financial education, that the crews then, if we build, for example, 2 houses in each community, then that crew with the repair programs too could actually create jobs that were there year after year. And this is just an example of some of the things that our crews have built, our local crews have built. And we're so excited about that. In our home ownership program, Success Starts With Me, so the Housing Authority builds the houses through our local crews, and the person who's participating in the program as being the potential homeowner or the future homeowner, they can actually participate in helping to build their own home through our sweat equity program. And then, of course, we look for down payment assistance. The Federal Reserve has been a great partner with that. BIA has been a great partner with that. And we look for other ways of being able to leverage the cost. Now, this cost of one of these homes, we started out with thinking that they were about $375 in our villages to get them there and to build them. And then at the end of COVID, they turn out to be around $450. And of course, we have loan limit caps that are set by the state, which are much lower than that. So we're always having to look for ways of using federal dollars and resources to put in the infrastructure to be able to help buy down the cost to make these affordable homes. But in the long run, they're still more affordable than us building a home and having someone renting it and us having to maintain it year after year. For in our long-term sustainability plan, it makes sense for us to promote home ownership where people can actually take advantage of home ownership and be a successful homeowner. Other things that we did was we looked at the communities that we're in. And in Juneau, for example, the priority in 2019 through a large homeless effort of the coalition and survey of the community was the number one priority was a need for a youth homeless shelter. And it just wasn't happening. So what the Housing Authority did was we partnered with the city of Juneau. We rented this building leased this building from them that they owned that was vacant for $1 a year. We renovated it. We got a lot of community partners, a lot of private and federal and state and local contributions to make it happen. But we're not the experts in providing youth services. So we partnered with the Zach Gordon Youth Center. They provide the day-to-day operations, and we provide the maintenance and the care of the building. We also then went on to partner with them on youth rapid rehousing. And so we provide the landlord leasing and operations, and they provide the navigation services. It's really turned out to be a great strategic partner and helps us address a critical need in our community. This is called Shayi Hot Hit, just so you know. It's where what it means is where the roots all come together so we can hold, it makes us stronger, and so we can hold our youth up. There's a longer story, but I won't tell you all that today. Another example is in our community, we have been, through our building our local crews, we have strong apprenticeship programs. And in our Southeast Alaska, we are in the rainforest. We are in the Tongass rainforest. And there was a big change in our economy when timber was no longer to become the large industry, and the biggest player, Sealaska Corporation, stepped out to put their land for carbon credits and to hold it into trust. And so there was a huge loss of jobs. And what we did as a partnership with Spruce Root, another CDFI, and numerous other partners in Southeast Alaska, we put together a plan on how can we deal with wood products in a sustainable way. And we wrote a grant that we got the first phase funded, the EDA Build Back Better Regional Challenge. We didn't get the second and the final phase of our $60 million request. But what we did get instead was strong partnerships way beyond where we had been before, with all the tribes, with locals, with the cities, with other entities, really committed to how do we make a sustainable economy? How do we utilize local lumber sources? How do we get our wood certified so that we can build using our own wood and the Forest Service wood to build some of those homes that more affordably in our community? In addition to that, because of the environmental look at how we were looking at Southeast Alaska, we also realized that we had a heavy dependence upon fossilized fuel, particularly for our heating, which was really, heating in Alaska is important. And so we took a look at how we can switch and convert to heat pumps. And the Housing Authority is the lead. We have put in over 450 heat pumps in Southeast Alaska, leading the industry, providing free trainings in our communities. We just had a couple last week, one in the Prince of Wales Island and one in Juneau, so that people can learn how to properly install the heat pumps. Other contractors can participate, get certification, and to be able to help address with a more affordable way of providing heating stores to some of our much needed elders and those that are on limited incomes. We also know that another collaboration that's really important to us is the way that we take care of our elders, our seniors. And here's just a couple of our senior centers out in the small villages. And they're very prominent in the community, important structure in those villages. But we partner with Catholic Community Services in most of our communities to provide the senior lunch program and to be able to do those day-to-day care services for our seniors that the Housing Authority is not equipped to do. But we're equipped to provide the housing and the place for those services to be provided. Other things that we've done as a community partner is building the capacity at the local level. Our tribe said, at the Clinton Haida Central Council, our regional tribe, I sit as the first vice president, and under our strategic plan, we said it was critical for us to be able to make sure that our citizens had access to programs that help them become independent, financially independent and independent on themselves. And so some of these are some of the programs that we partner with the tribe on and the tribes in our communities. Of course, we have our apprenticeship programs that are strong and going well, but we have a strong financial literacy program, and it's online or it's in the classroom. Not only is it budget and credit, but we realized that home maintenance was essential because we were spending so much money on just basic maintenance as it creates more of a problem in the homes. And then we realized that most of our people, once they get their homes, they don't maintain insurance. And that's a critical part to their asset building. So we offer classes on insurance. And now we're offering classes on retirement. We also, because the Housing Authority is not just an Indian Housing Authority, we also are a nonprofit under the IRS, designated nonprofit, so we can access other funds. And so that we could be like the income tax preparation preparers that we have been, and we partner with the tribe to do that. We also just recently became a community, a CBDO, a community, I want to get that right so I don't mess up, because I always do, a community-based development organization. And it wasn't something that we were looking to do, but when we realized that the ICDBG grants did not allow us to provide construction for residential construction unless we were this CBDO, well, we decided we have to apply for that to be that now. So those are some of the things that we felt like as a Indian Housing Authority we had to expand. We had to we had to create a CDFI. We had to expand who we were in order to provide the services that our tribes need. And so I wanted to talk a little bit before, as I close here, I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the challenges that we have met. Sometimes there were barriers that got in the way. And of course, we tried to seek solutions on how we could address those. For example, with the youth programs, HUD had requirements that said specifically how the board needed to be created. But as an Indian Housing Authority, our board had to be created a certain way that was created by the state under our state Alaska statutes, but also designated by our tribe. But HUD was a good partner and allowed us to make, allowed us to come up with a compromise solution on how we could create a youth advisory board that would actually serve to meet their expectations and allow us to proceed with that program. I already told you about how, building and needing to have developed new houses in our communities because there's such a lack of housing was critical. So when the ICDBG program required us to be a CDBO, we were glad that we were able to take that step and to be able to do that. And, even with our Build Back Better program, when we were trying to do the Build Back Regional Challenge, it didn't allow for housing. It wasn't an eligible activity. But what we did was we were able to rethink how we could do that. Instead, we put in investments to build local lumber, small scale lumber yards, so that we could build the timber and certify the timber and actually be able to develop the engineering and specs for what kind of timber needed to be developed. I think most of all, when you talk about community development, we remember that community participation is important, and organization, and of course, hard work. Many of us in the rural parts of Alaska and in all of Indian country, we wear many hats in order to be able to accomplish these activities. And I just want to say that I don't think our housing authority is different than any other Indian housing authority. So many of us have come from the idea, so many of our ideas came from somebody else's idea or a program that they have, and so willingly shared. Programs where we don't have to compete against each other, but we can actually partner with each other, or that we can share each other's information, just helps lift us all up and broaden the benefits. I just wanted to leave you this last slide here. I thought this was a really good document for those of you who want to know more about community development in Indian country and what does that look like. Thank you, Ganesh Chish Hawa.
Good afternoon. As the slides have transitioned. Good afternoon. My name is Libby Sterling, and I am coming to you from the Center for Indian Country Development based at the Minneapolis Fed. Next slide. Thank you. So as Meller already indicated, thank you, Meller. The check will be in the mail for that acknowledgement. The Center for Indian Country Development is a part of the Federal Reserve System, and our work is in supporting tribes in reaching their full economic potential through actionable research and community collaboration, with the goal of advancing solutions in Indian country that lead to tribal economic prosperity. In the homeownership space, we have done a lot of research as well as convening and collaboration with the goal of understanding the challenges and opportunities around tribal homeownership. Next slide. So in thinking about this, in my 10 minutes this afternoon, I'd like to call out 3 challenges facing Indian country homeownership. The challenges associated with getting clear title for land, challenges in the lending markets, and then challenges with the federal programs that are designed to support homeownership in Indian country. So I'll go through each of these and lay out some of the opportunities and solutions that are beginning to emerge in each of these areas. Next slide. So one thing to note is that interest in homeownership in Indian country is high. A survey done several years ago, researchers found that 90% of renters in Indian country would like to be homeowners. So there is a goal of homeownership within Indian country as part of the broader sense of self-determination and sovereignty. Next slide. But thinking about how to get to homeownership, coming back to the 3 challenges, the first I want to call out is the challenges associated with trust and title for land, particularly looking at the lands that are held in trust by the federal government and managed through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So on the lands that are in trust, the land in trust cannot be conveyed or sold without the consent of the federal government. And obtaining a mortgage on tribal trust land requires that the Bureau of Indian Affairs certifies a title status report. Now, the challenge is that when everything goes smoothly, this is simply an administrative process. But in 2019, a tribal leader told a Senate committee that they were looking at delays in the title status report of 1 year. So imagine the timing of trying to put a mortgage together, trying to lock down a rate, and then facing a 1 year gap in which there's no information or very little information in order to jump through the hoops. Now, the good news is that we've heard more recently from the BIA's land titles and records offices that title status reports are being moved through the process in as few as 4 days. But regardless, we see the differences that clearing title for trust land is much more time consuming than doing so for non-trust land or land outside of Indian country. Next slide. As a result, in part of the challenges of obtaining title in the process in trust land, as well as other pieces, our research has found that Native American borrowers on tribal lands are much more likely to receive high-cost mortgages. So on research that was done in the 2010 to 2017 period, we found that overall Native American borrowers in tribal lands were paying 2% higher, 2 percentage points higher on interest rates on home loans than comparable borrowers outside of Indian country. Over the lifetime of a loan, this could be $107,000 in additional costs that result simply from the higher interest rates that are being paid by Native American borrowers. There are several key drivers of this. One is the procedural differences. So looking at the leasehold mortgage versus the freehold mortgage, and the challenge in the collateralization of trust land to assure the lender that there is collateral associated with the loan. Because these loans are non-conforming and not easily resold to the government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, there's a weaker resale market for these mortgages, and therefore they simply cost more. Another piece is that there's a higher use of manufactured housing as a housing option within Indian country. Some of this results from the construction challenges associated with stick-built construction. Some of this is the distance. Some of this is rural areas. But with the greater share of manufactured housing, there's also a greater use of chattel loans, which again have a different resale market, as well as a high degree of concentration among the lenders who make chattel loans available. So collectively, Native American borrowers in tribal lands are receiving higher cost mortgage loans. Next slide. So there are a series of federal tools that are designed to work in Indian country, notably the Section 184, USDA Section 502, the VA's Native American Direct Loan Program. But these are being used and underutilized in different ways. So the Section 184 Indian Home Loan Guarantee Program is oversubscribed, but at the point when it was allowed to be used on fee simple land versus tribal trust land, almost all of the mortgages that are receiving that home loan guarantee through Section 184 are on fee simple land, the easier mortgages versus on tribal trust land. So both lenders and borrowers are migrating to the ease. But overall, next slide, in terms of making some of these federal programs more effective, I do want to call out the critical role that is being played by Native community development financial institutions. And the next two speakers come from Native American community development financial institutions, or Native CDFIs. So one issue, of course, is when there are potential home buyers who aren't mortgage ready. Native CDFIs are providing the home buyer counseling and support that help clean up credit issues and help families become mortgage ready. Native CDFIs, unlike other CDFIs in traditional banking, provide the culturally informed financial services directly relevant to Native communities. And with these cultural considerations, there's better trust and better relationships that come together. And as a previous speaker noted, research from the Center for Indian Country Development has found that Native CDFIs on or near reservations do improve credit scores. So if you imagine 1,000 residents adding one native CDFI staff person per that 1,000 residents has a 45-point increase in the Equifax credit scores for residents who are living on or close to Indian land. So there's a key importance of native CDFIs in improving the entire homeownership ecosystem. Next slide. I do want to call out the resource to support tribal homeownership, which is the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership that the Center for Indian Country Development released several years ago. We are grateful to the ongoing partnership with NeighborWorks America, as well as enterprise community partners and many tribal leaders who told their stories to put them together into the Tribal Leaders Handbook. But this is a way of understanding both the challenges and the best practices of moving into homeownership. Next slide. So going through these three challenges that I laid out around the land, lending, and federal programs, there are specific pieces that are changing things for the better. So in terms of securing the clean title on land, as I said, the title status reports seem to be accelerating right now, and we're hopeful that that will continue. In terms of lending, here, Fern will talk about their work as the home buyer counseling, but native CDFIs are doing more in order to have effective lending. And with that, the more effective use of federal programs. So calling out, for example, the work of the South Dakota Home Ownership Coalition in improving the effectiveness of the Section 502 program in Indian Country. Next slide. And with that, I thank you for your time and look forward to hearing from our future panelists.
Sagoli, and good afternoon. My name is Fern Ori. I am the Chief Programs Officer at the Owista Corporation. Next slide, please. I wanted to just talk briefly about who we are. We're a national native CDFI intermediary. We are located with headquarters in Longmont, Colorado, and we serve all of Indian Country from Alaska to Hawaii, from Maine to the state of Washington. So we're serving Indian Country as a whole. And just a tidbit, Owista is the Mohawk word for money or an item of exchange. Next slide, please. Just wanted to touch on our mission and values. Our mission is to provide opportunities for Native people to develop financial assets and create wealth by assisting in the establishment of strong, permanent institutions and programs, contributing to economic independence and strengthening sovereignty for all Native communities. And along with that, our values that it's the essence of our corporation, is that we believe that when we are armed with the appropriate resources, Native people hold the capacity and ingenuity to ensure sustainable economic, spiritual, and cultural well-being of our communities. Next slide, please. Highlighting some of the key components of the work that the Owista Corporation does. We provide training and technical assistance to all of our native CDFI industry. This goes from everything to providing super customized training and certification programming, from everything from financial management to loan officer underwriting training to very customized executive level management sessions. And all of these services that we provide, we can do them on-site, place-based training. We offer them virtually, and then we also hold sessions throughout the year with our 18-month certification program. All of these are to support this establishment and sustainability of our native CDFI industry. Along with our TA and training, a big portion of what we do at Owista, since we are an intermediary, is our lending and capitalization. We have loan capital pools that we have provided throughout the years, two $10 million loan capital pools to our native CDFIs. Also lifting up the communities and investing in them is a priority. Along with our regular loan products, one of the ones I like to highlight, we have a first in loan for native CDFIs that are emerging. It's always a challenge to find startup capital to do lending. So we have a first in loan product that has really been able to have capacity building for our CDFIs and having access to capital for their startup loan seed. Along with that, we have other loan products available to our CDFIs, directly lending to native CDFIs across Indian. Along with that, we also have a research and policy advocacy arm that we serve, working in partnership with a lot of our fabulous partners like the Native CDFI Network, the Center for Indian Country Development, working with tribes, working with a lot of national partners, and basically serving as a voice for Native communities to help inform policy, supporting Native community economic development. Next slide, please. Some of our proven results of our 23 years of existence. We've revolved over $50 million in Native communities, and that is on the housing and business front. Over 180 units created of housing, over 2,600 small businesses have been financed, and then over 12,000 jobs have been created or retained. Next slide, please. Some of our technical assistance and capacity stats. We have almost 3,000 hours of technical assistance that were provided just in fiscal year 2021 alone. So you can imagine the ripple effect throughout the years and going forward. We have just in 2021, over 3,500 people have been educated in some of our convenings and webinars and on-site technical assistance visits. Also, the trickle-down theory, we're training trainers in each CDFI that are subsequently training community members. So these numbers are speaking directly to our partners. So the larger number is exponential. We have certified 205 trainers just in 2021 alone in our curriculum Building Native Communities. This is the train-the-trainer model that we've had. I want to say the number is over 40,000 tribal members or people across the United States have taken this training over the course of its duration. You can imagine families that are able to access financial education, teach their families in turn, and how it's leveling up our generations. Also, financial education led by our trainers in 2021, almost 3,500. Next, please. I wanted to talk a little about why housing. In 2018, we did a report. Things have changed significantly since then, of course, but with an expansion of existing loan products, basically our CDFI industry had said that they would add a mortgage loan product if the funding were available. As we know, some of that's the crux of these challenges with low-cost long-term capital for housing being the issue. But over 40% of Native CDFIs would want to add a mortgage loan product. We've seen a growth in this sector as Native CDFIs have built the capacity of local borrowers. The communities have grown increasingly able to purchase homes, creating increased demand for mortgage lending. This demand is reflected in the many market studies conducted by Native CDFIs that are all showing a strong demand for housing development across Indian country. As Native CDFIs have built their internal organizational strength, more Native CDFIs now have the capacity to offer a mortgage lending product. Next slide, please. I wanted to touch on our strategic goal about housing. The goal around building an effective platform that will support Native CDFI's ability to provide homeownership financing for Native families. What we've done with that, as Mellor mentioned, is we have created a HUD Housing Counseling Network. Currently, we have 11 certified Native CDFIs as part of this HUD Counseling Network. We serve as the umbrella organization over this network. We create more robust training and TA initiatives on housing-focused topics. We work with our network and provide and enhance collaborations and partnerships to break down homeownership barriers and support access to mortgage capital in Indian country. Along with all of this, we're creating innovative strategies for capital access for our Native CDFIs and also addressing challenges for affordable housing financing and mortgage lending, including access to the secondary market. Next slide, please. I wanted to just highlight our multi-pronged approach to supporting housing. We have long-term, low-cost capital that we are trying to always procure to offer to our native CDFI partners, and building loan capital pools on the basis of this, supporting housing lending across Indian country. We have focused research with advisory groups composed of different native partners. We have key partnership building with government-sponsored entities like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, NeighborWorks, NIAC, etc. We're doing fundraising and grant making along these realms. We're doing cohorts and network building as an example of our HUD housing counseling network. We also have a mortgage lending network that I'll speak on briefly as well. And then of course, addressing secondary market challenges. And the other piece too is offering the housing training and TA that I mentioned as well. On to the next slide, please. So a few of the secondary market challenges that we've seen across our sector as the native CDFI industry is noting that we need more flexible underwriting terms in underlying mortgage products, down payment requirements, credit scores, income requirements. Native CDFI loans are often considered non-conforming to the secondary market. So we're trying to address barriers and challenges around that. Also looking at when servicing organizations buy the loans. It's critical that the native CDFIs maintain the ability to service the loans and maintain those relationships with their clients. That's definitely been a key marker to the success in our borrowers across CDFI Indian country. We've also wanted to focus our energies in correcting some of these underlying challenges in partnering with these other agencies, and also looking to foster those relationships and build that capacity for native CDFIs to become direct seller and services for years to come. Recently, we've made recommendations to the FHFA board in order to increase homeownership opportunities. The elimination of any unnecessary MOU requirements with tribal nations is one element. Also creating a CDFI preferred product, allowing GSEs to offer affordable products to over-income borrowers on restricted tribal lands. Also to make equity-like investments to CDFIs, similarly to PRIs or program-related investments. And also to continue investing in native CDFI capacity building for secondary market access in order to take advantage of this emerging market. Those are just some of the things that we've been recommending. Along with building partnerships with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we're working to implement these recommendations, especially around the servicing concerns. I wanted to touch a bit here as well. We have a native CDFI mortgage lending cohort. Currently, this program supports 13 native CDFIs in the mortgage lending space. This is growing, and we have more partners that are looking to be part of the cohort. We're offering direct technical assistance, sub-grant support, and cohort calls and training for peer sharing and networking, and bringing in partners to provide opportunities. Along with that, we have part of that is the CLIMB program. The Homeownership Council of America has a program, it's Community Lending Initiatives in Mortgage Banking, AKA CLIMB. This provides a growth path for CDFIs and HUD-approved housing counseling agencies through this program, which offers value proposition in product offerings and capital markets outlets for creating long-term sustainability. It aims to increase overall service to underserved communities on a national level, and also creates options for the less served consumers in their market areas. Next slide, please. Here's a timeline of our native HUD housing counseling network, the first of its kind. We started back in 2019 and really surveyed our industry and gathered up applications from CDFIs that were interested in becoming part of the network. We did some MOUs and signed on with, I believe at the time there was 13 native CDFIs. We held a HUD housing counseling training to kick it off in February of 2020. And once COVID hit, we had to revert to being a virtual network. It worked out wonderfully by offering monthly calls, peer-to-peer sharing. Again, we provide sub-grants and technical support. We just held an in-person training back in June of this year, first in-person for our network since the kickoff in 2020. But really capitalizing on each other's strengths and providing best practices, really managing different policy priorities as a whole across Indian country for housing as a group, and really answering those capital needs across our Native communities. Right now, we have 11 Native CDFIs that are part of the cohort. We have HUD housing counseling certified counselors that are on board of each CDFI, and really just trying to level up our housing market and housing capacity across Indian country in the Native CDFI capital space. Some of the long-term benefits are the funding from HUD as part of our network has helped us be able to do some of the work we're doing with the network. And of course, providing network support and being that intermediary offering capital, technical assistance, and advocacy. Some of the things that we're working on expanding with that is some rental assistance counseling, foreclosure prevention. And currently we have just submitted Treasury's Equitable Recovery Program grant application. We have some components to offer DPA and IDA capital in those pieces as well, when I believe that grant comes out in 2024. Next slide, please. I just want to touch briefly on some of the future opportunities. Always working on policy and advocacy, of course, in Indian country, now more than ever around housing with our partners, including the Native CDFI network, NIAC, HUD, also becoming 184 lenders and 502 lenders, expanding that opportunity for our industry. Some of the challenges that some of the previous speakers have talked about as well, those barriers and obstacles for lending on tribal lands in Indian country. Some of the insurance and bonding issues out there, basically not having access or reasonable premiums on insurance or bonding. Some of these bonding issues are for CDFIs trying to become 184 lenders. So we're really trying to do some advocacy work in those spaces, more working with tribes on MOUs and developing relationships there. And then also, we all know there's a lack of, I always say, appraisers and developers in Indian country, especially Native appraisers and developers in Indian country. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to underscore the whole reason we are doing this is to create more Native homeowners and more Native housing development across Indian. You won't go, everyone. I'll turn it over to Pete Upton. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pete Upton, and I am the Interim Executive Director for the Native CDFI Network, and I'm also the Executive Director for Native 360, which is located in Grand Island, Nebraska, and we serve South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, and northern Kansas currently. Next slide, please. It's kind of nice to go last here because really they kind of set the segue on what the Native CDFI network is all about. First of all, you have the challenges. I look for solutions, and then we look for ways that we can advocate for better policies to serve housing needs in Indian country. The national poverty rate for Native Americans was at 25.4%, while Black and African American poverty rate was at 20.8%. And among the Hispanics, the national poverty rate was 17.6%. So the poverty rate that Native Americans face is, high, the highest of all minorities. So as a Native American myself, I'm a member of the Ponca tribe of Nebraska. And we are a non-land-based tribe in Nebraska. So I have the benefit that I think I have my foot in both doors. I serve Native CDFIs, and I also can find out what's going on in the weeds and in the field, and recognize the challenges that we need to overcome. And every one of our speakers today really did a great job on emphasizing all the different challenges that we face, but Native Americans, we find solutions. So the solutions a lot of times is by the Native CDFI network advocating for policy change and enhancing relationships and allowing our federal agencies, our lawmakers, and our local community leaders to have a better understanding of what the needs truly are, and to have Native American voices at the table speaking about Native American issues. That is so important because it's really hard for me living in Nebraska to understand what Jackie's going through in Alaska and vice versa. So we each have unique challenges. And that was really the policy and advocacy that the Native CDFI Network does. The Native CDFI Network was formed in 2009 to unify Native CDFIs serving Native trust land communities, Native American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and Native and Hawaiians. The Native CDFI Network seeks to create opportunities to share our stories, identify our collective priorities, and strengthen our industry. In addition, the Native CDFI Network works to ensure Native peoples are represented in the national policy dialogue and innovative solutions created by CDFIs and are spread throughout our Native communities. So really, in a nutshell, the Native CDFI Network is the conduit from so many of our Native communities across the 27 states that we reside in to Washington, D.C. to bring some of those federal dollars back to our communities. Next slide, please. Again, we're the Native CDFI Network. We're the only national network of Native CDFIs with members operating in 27 states. Advocacy, the national advocacy voice for Native CDFI, is driven by Native CDFI executives through an appointment of 9-member policy committee. Currently, we have 9 members of our board of directors, and they come from 9 different regions that we developed in 2020. And then from there, we appointed a 9-member policy committee. And the reason for that is we wanted to have a voice from every region that represents our Native CDFIs. And again, it goes back to the challenges that they have in Hawaii and Alaska and Wisconsin. They're unique and different challenges, but in essence the same, but there's maybe a different political structure, maybe some geographic challenges. So that's the reason it's so important that we continue our 9-member policy committee and our board of directors made up of 9 different regions. And again, the training, NCN launched a NCN Institute to provide high quality training for our members. Over the summer, New England Market Research, they did a 4-month training that focused on underwriting, bringing better underwriting practices to our Native CDFI members. And access to capital, the Native CDFI Network, we are in the process of becoming an intermediary ourselves just to provide access to long-term, low-cost capital for our NCN members. And really the purpose for that was out of a need that sometimes if you have more intermediaries, you're just going to bring more money to Indian country. And that was the sole purpose of bringing more affordable, and I emphasize this, long-term capital. Go ahead, next slide, please. The Native CDFI, what our leadership does for Indian country is we advocate, we bring the stories that we hear from the Jackie Pattas to Fern Ories, everyone within our network. We are the conduit, again, that brings the stories and the needs to our leaders. In 2019, when the CRA reforms were going, I was part of a group that did a tour in New Mexico with, at that time, Representative Howland, now with the Department of Interior. And we also meet quite regularly with some of our true heroes within the congressional ranks. Lisa Murkowski is really a strong supporter of all the work that the Native CDFI network does. And the same thing with Representative Deb Holland with the Department of Interior. We have to be able to communicate the stories to really move and shift the funding platform sometimes. And until they really hear the stories and they're moved by the stories that are happening in Indian country, very little is going to be changed. They have to understand what the communities need in the grassroots areas of Indian country. And all of our stories that we are able to communicate really have to be impactful, and we have to gather the data. We have so many partners when it comes to gathering data, from OISTA to the Center of Indian Country Development, great partners there, NeighborWorks, and we'll continue to advocate strongly for an increase in appropriations. Next slide, please. Again, it starts in the grassroots. I have, personally, I have a lot of meetings with our tribal citizens throughout the Indian country. And then from there, we elevate that story to a national level. Center for Indian Country Development a couple of years ago had a native gathering, and I visiting with Robin Danner out in Hawaii, Crystal Cornelius, and then I recently had an opportunity to engage with the Clinton Foundation. So we need to elevate that story continually. And I feel that the Native CDFI network is, again, the conduit that brings our stories to the national spotlight. Next slide, please. Again, 73 certified Native CDFIs, and we're active in 27 states. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to kind of speed things up here. Next slide, please. The Native CDFI network, it was our policy committee was created in 2021, and it was kind of the result of COVID. We needed to have a better understanding what was going on in the communities. So we created a 9-region policy committee delegate that represents their respective regions. And the NCN policy committee serves the following purposes: to ensure an inclusive voice. It strengthens local advocacy and increases regional capacity building, and supports fundraising on a local level as well as a national level. Next slide, please. The 9 regions that we have designated, as you can see there, the eastern part of the United States, there's a handful of Native CDFIs, but I would say the majority of our Native CDFIs are west of the Mississippi. And Robin Danner is our national policy chair, and she is the chair of the Sovereign Council of Hawaiian Homesteads Association. And Robin serves part-time in DC, and then she also resides in Hawaii herself. Robin drives our national policy making on an annual basis. And Brittany, I think I'm going to have you bring up our 2022 policy priority list, if you could, because I see the timer running short here. And if you could blow that up just a little bit. As the Native CDFI network, we gather annually, and from there, these are the policy priorities for 2022 that were established. And they were established, we lost them there, there we go. They were established by our membership. We have a membership meeting coming up on December 6th, 7th, and 8th. So at that time, we'll reestablish our 2023 policy priorities, but you can see when it comes, we have it broken down in what I would call buckets of focus. U.S. Treasury, the CDFI fund is naturally, we intend to increase our appropriations annually. This year, our goal was 30 to 50 million. They increased it to 21.5 million, which was a 30% increase over the previous 5 or 6 years. It had been stagnant at about 16 million. And that's not a lot of money to go around when there's 73 Native CDFIs. Another priority was the new market tax credit set aside for Native communities at 10% of the annual new market tax credit allocation. And several of these we've hit. There's been a group formed, a listening group. Big Water Consulting was contracted with Treasury to engage Native CDFI leaders, Native community leaders, in finding out a little bit more on how they can better serve Indian country when it comes to new market tax credits. And then also engaging Native CDFI working groups. We've achieved that. Established an Office of Native American Programs within Treasury. They just opened that up this year. And what we also advocate for is realizing that Native CDFIs in general, we operate on lower scales, smaller scales. I would say the average Native CDFI asset size is maybe between 10 to 20 million. So we're small potatoes compared to some of the non-Native CDFIs. So we constantly work with the CDFI fund to ensure that the performance measurements and goals aren't too encumbersome for smaller Native CDFIs. And again, the second one that we really focused on this year was housing, the HUD and the USDA programs, and to establish a 10% set aside of HUD Section 4 sole source funding for investment in tribal areas, and then to end redlining in the home loan origination, servicing, and loan loss mitigations with the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. And again, I'm getting, we got a couple more minutes here, but the thing that I want to really emphasize here is that the Native CDFI network, we have so many networks and partners out there. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, I serve on their advisory board. Also, I serve on the Kansas City Federal Reserve Bank Advisory Board. And what our goal this year was to get more Native voices at these tables so that they can really get a sense of what is needed in Indian country, and to have our voice, have Native issues being resolved, and at least having Native Americans in that process of finding some of these solutions that so many Native communities continue to face on housing and small business development. And really, the Native CDFI network, we look at a holistic approach of creating a community, because you have to have housing, you have to have jobs, you have to have small businesses, and then you have to have consumer lending as well. People have to have reliable transportation to get to work. You have to be able to work to pay for your home mortgage. So it's really a 360 holistic approach on how the Native CDFI network conducts its policy priorities on an annual basis. I invite everybody. I hope we have some people on here from the OCCMR. Currently, I serve on a Project Reach board there, that we're developing a white paper, Native American housing issues, that the OCC is working on. So many great partners that are really stepping up to the challenge of Native American housing, and sometimes all the challenges that go with them. What we're looking for is solutions. We know what the problems are, but how do we resolve those? And the only way that we're going to resolve them, and Robin Danner, a good friend of mine, she always says, we have to have the agencies come to us, listen, so that they understand and we can teach them what's going on in Indian country. Robin is a strong voice for Native peoples all throughout Indian country. She is our national policy director. So as we go through, we have a small business administration bucket of priorities that we have. And I'm proud to say I could go on probably and mark off about at least 10 of our policy priorities that we have achieved. And this is so important because it keeps me and our board of directors and our policy committee focused on what is the top priorities and how we're marking them off. And but the thing of it is, they never go away. Once we hit 30 to 50 million, it'll probably increase from there. And what our goal is that we listen to our Native leaders, and they tell us where the shifts in policy need to be to best serve our Native homeowners, our Native American citizens, both on and off reservation. How much time do I have left there? I think we're running. close here. Hang
Hi,
on.
Pete.
Hi
This
there.
is Miller. We are almost at time. We wanted to get in a couple of questions before we ended the session.
Okay.
Brittany, want to bring our folks online really quickly to answer one question. And I guess as we're almost about time, so I just want to go back to our panelists and ask this question. Given the outlook that we have in Indian country and the state of Indian housing, can you give us one word that youth would see as opportunities or a positive outcome that you see in Indian housing for the future? One word. And we'll start with Jackie.
One word. Independence.
Independence. Great. Libby.
Partnership.
Fern.
Collaboration.
Pete.
Fern stole my word there. Collaboration and I guess networks.
Great. And I'll include mine, self-determination. Thanks. And thank you all for joining us today. Brittany, do we have anything else that we need to close out with?
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to come on screen and say thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists. I know we chose a very important topic when we don't get to the Q&A. That means that you all had so much just really important information to share. So thank you again for being here. And if any, thank you again to NeighborWorks America for sponsoring this webinar series. And thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon. If you're interested in joining NHC, you can go to our website at nhc.org and find out more information. And again, thank you to the panelists. This has been just an incredible, informative presentation. So everyone, have a great afternoon.
Thank you.